Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. The sun came up over Fort Braddock like a bare bulb switched on above a long concrete hallway. Light hit the metal roofs, bounced off the Humvees, and rolled across the dust of the obsidian yard. Boots hit gravel in a steady rhythm, breath fell into patterns, and the morning whistle sliced the air. Recruits tightened their straps, adjusted helmets, and tried to quiet the nerves that always showed on daybreak. Out by the starting cones, Sergeant Olivia Hale stood with her arms relaxed at her sides, eyes tracking every detail like she'd seen this 1,000 times. People called her Phoenix. No announcement, no ceremony. The name moved camp to camp by word of mouth, and at Fort Braddock it traveled quietly, like a nod between professionals. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. The heat hadn't settled yet, but you could already feel the desert pushing up from the ground. Olivia checked a stopwatch, gave a small hand signal to the cadre, and the first group broke into a jog toward the rope frames. Ethan Cole watched her from the line with that half-smirk that tries to read his confidence. He was strong, fast, and sure of himself in a way that left no room for doubt. Trash talk came easy, even if he kept most of it under his breath. Lucas Grant stood at his shoulder, laughing too loud at things that weren't really jokes, more out of habit than humor. Ryan Beck kept to the side, quiet and steady, one of those faces that looked the same before and after the run, the kind that notices more than he says. Sergeant Major David Harris moved along the ranks like a steel cable in motion, checking form, fixing slouching backs with a tap of the knuckles on a ruck frame. Lieutenant Sarah O'Donnell stood near the whiteboard, recording times, watching Olivia's cues more than the numbers. Above them, Observation Ridge caught the first wind of the day, a flag snapping at the peak, and the long shadow of the tower clock nudged toward 8. The camp looked the same as yesterday, and yet it felt like it was waiting for something. Olivia stepped onto the course and demonstrated without a word. Hands placed, feet set, weight distributed, breath measured. The climb looked simple when she did it because she never fought the obstacle. She read it, moved with it, then moved on. The scars on her arms didn't ask for attention, they were just there, the way seams exist on a field jacket, evidence of construction and durability, not decoration. Recruits watched and fell silent in that unconscious way crowds do when competence walks past. Harris blew the whistle, and the lanes filled. Ethan powered forward first, loud steps, quick hands, a show of speed for anyone looking. Dust rose behind him in a thin trail. Lucas tried to match the pace and nearly slipped off the first wall before catching himself. Beck ran his own tempo, breathing even, eyes straight ahead. Olivia drifted along the sidelines, not hovering, not interfering, but always close enough to catch a detail others missed: loose strap, bad grip, wasted motion. By mid-morning the heat settled in. Sweat darkened collars, and the sound of boots through mud mixed with the clank of steel on steel. The obsidian yard didn't shout, it ground you down a little at a time until only habits were left. That was the point. Under stress, habits tell on you. Ethan kept checking to see if anyone was watching. Someone always was. He locked eyes with Olivia once and felt nothing in return, no challenge, no approval, just clean assessment. It frustrated him more than a reprimand would have. At Barracks 12, bunks stood sharp and squared away, but the tension lived outside today. Rumor said General Marcus Whitaker was due on base this week. No one knew if that meant today. At the command wing, the windows mirrored the sky so you couldn't read activity inside. Sarah glanced that way more than once, then back to the board, then to Olivia. The day had that quiet charge camps get when something bigger than routine is on approach. Olivia called a break with a small lift of her hand. No speech. Water up. Shade where you can find it. Ethan leaned on a post like he owned it. Lucas cracked a joke that didn't land. Beck stretched his forearms and rolled his neck, then stood at ease. Harris paced through the cluster, correcting a stance here, a strap there. Sarah stepped close to Olivia and said something low. Olivia nodded once, eyes already on the next rotation, stopwatch ready. When drills resumed, the course expanded. Balance beam to cargo net to low crawl through a shallow trench cut into red Texas dirt. The trench held last night's damp, a cool against the arms that vanished the second you stood. Olivia moved along the edge and watched form more than finish. She adjusted a recruit's elbow, rotated a wrist on a rope, lifted a chin with 2 fingers and a look. No wasted instruction. No filler words. Everything she did reduced friction and saved seconds, and everyone felt it even if they couldn't name it. Ethan pushed harder. He wanted to beat the posted times in a way that registered on the people holding the stopwatch. He wanted to step to the front of any line and make it feel normal. He noticed the scars, everyone did. He decided they meant exactly what he needed them to mean to keep his image intact. Pride is good at quick math like that. Olivia didn't give him much to work with. She didn't take offense. She didn't grant approval. She just worked. By noon, the yard looked bleached out under the sun. The wind skimmed the surface of the gravel and carried the smell of hot metal. Harris ended the block with a whistle and sent them to shade. A convoy rolled by the far fence line, dust trailing behind like a flag no one saluted. Sarah checked her watch. Beck tracked the convoy until it cleared the corner. Lucas pulled off a boot and shook out grit. Ethan wiped his face with the edge of his shirt and stared across the field at Olivia, who stood alone, timing lanes, eyes narrowed against the glare. Fort Braddock wasn't a place for speeches, but it kept a memory better than most. People came through, left sign on the buildings, left sign on the dirt, then moved on. Some names stayed. Phoenix was one of those names. You didn't hear it shouted. You heard it once, quietly, then you kept it. The camp didn't bend around her, it aligned. Not with noise. With standards. Afternoon would bring longer evolutions and tighter margins. Somewhere beyond the heat haze, a black SUV took the turn toward the main gate and slowed at the checkpoint. In the yard, Olivia clicked the stopwatch, raised her hand, and the next group stepped to the line. The day kept moving, and every movement nudged the story forward, inch by inch, toward whatever was coming over that road. The SUV cleared the checkpoint and rolled past the motor pool, windows dark, pace steady like it had all the time in the world. Word doesn't travel by announcement at Fort Braddock, it travels by glances. One driver slowed, one gate guard straightened, one cadre looked up from a clipboard, and the line knew enough to stand a little taller. Harris blew the whistle and reset the lanes. Olivia lifted her hand and the next block began like any other, which is the only way days like this ever start. Ethan locked in on the first station like he was walking onto a stage. He drove his knees high over the tires, slammed both palms to the wall, and hauled himself up with a grunt meant to sound casual. Lucas trailed, already winded but pretending not to be. Beck kept the middle, quiet as always, forearms flexed, eyes moving ahead to plan his steps. Olivia paced the sideline and tracked details. She caught a hitch in Ethan's left foot on the beam and tapped her wrist twice, small note, even smaller correction, but Ethan didn't want a correction. He wanted a reaction. When he glanced up and only found calm, he pushed harder than the course asked. The heat sharpened by late morning. Dust stuck to sweat. The trench cut a shallow bruise through the yard and funneled bodies one after another into the crawl. Ethan dropped in like a splash, elbows flaring wide, shoulders scraping mud. He popped out at the other end, did a quick showy shake, then looked back to make sure someone saw. A couple recruits laughed out of habit. Lucas gave a thumbs up that didn't mean much. Harris's face didn't change. Sarah wrote down times and watched Olivia instead of the board. That's how the first comment slipped out. Quiet, aimed sideways, casual on purpose. Ethan let his eyes pass over the pale lines on Olivia's forearm and smirked like he'd found a shortcut. Nobody gasped. Nobody snapped. The yard has a way of absorbing noise and returning consequence later. Olivia didn't even turn her head. She corrected a recruit's grip on the rope, rotated a wrist 2 degrees, then stepped away. The silence made the remark smaller than Ethan wanted it to be, so he made a second one, a touch louder, timed for when people were near enough to hear but far enough to pretend they didn't. If he expected anger, he didn't get it. Competence is a wall no shove can move. Olivia ran a quick demo on the high rope, palms steady, heels down, hips aligned with the line. She dropped light, clicked the stopwatch, and waved the lane forward. Beck watched the form and mirrored it on his go. Lucas tried to, slipped on the dismount, and hid the stumble with a joke. Ethan went last and rushed the sequence to outpace the posted time. He didn't outpace it. He missed by 2 seconds and looked around like the clock had cheated him. By then the black SUV had parked near the command wing. No uniformed parade. No red carpet. Just a door opening and boots touching asphalt. The rumor of a visit turned into the fact of presence, and the air pulled tight like a rope under load. Harris didn't call attention to it. He only shortened the rest window and ordered a second rotation through the loop. Pressure reveals posture. Olivia gave a chin nod. The cadre shifted. The loop began again. Ethan hit the wall faster this time and burned grip on the top edge. He recovered with a swing that wasted energy and cost him breath. Olivia's eyes tracked the movement, then moved on. That was worse than a lecture. It told him his mistake didn't even rate a comment. He felt heat rise that wasn't the sun. He wanted to be seen, and the only thing getting noticed was how much he wanted it. The second remark landed harder because the group was more tired. Tension turned small sounds sharp. A laugh from Lucas died halfway and became a cough. Beck's gaze slid off Ethan like water off glass. Sarah didn't look up from the board. Harris's whistle cut across the yard and sent 3 lanes to the trench. Olivia stepped to the entry and pointed to 4 spots in the mud, hand here, knee there, weight there, eyes forward. The first 2 recruits shaved time just by listening. Ethan saw it, felt it, and hated that nothing flashy had done more than 2 precise instructions. By early afternoon the shadow at observation ridge shortened and went soft. The wind picked up and pushed grit low across the ground so ankles disappeared in a tan blur when people moved. In that haze, a familiar figure settled at the far edge of the yard near the cones, no fanfare, just presence. General Marcus Whitaker carried authority the way some people carry a backpack, with no fuss and no slouch. He wasn't close enough to interrupt, but close enough that every person on the course adjusted some small thing without meaning to. A chin lifted. A shoulder squared. A breath came in slower to hide the thump. Harris narrowed his eyes, shortened the briefing to a nod, and let the work keep talking. Olivia didn't turn toward the general. She walked past the rope frames and corrected a carabiner angle, then checked a strap on a ruck. When she finally looked up, it was only to track the lane spacing. Whitaker saw the same thing everyone else had seen all morning, the steadiness, the economy, the refusal to make herself the center of any frame. That told him enough. Ethan felt the weight of the gaze without earning it. Pride hates distance. He pushed into the beam and tried to take it at a sprinter's rhythm. The beam doesn't care. It wants balance or it taxes you. He nearly stepped off, saved it with a windmill of arms, and landed messy. Beck crossed next like a metronome, calm feet and quiet core. Lucas cleared with a hop that worked only because he didn't overthink it. Olivia's face didn't change for any of them. The last block of the cycle came with a longer crawl, a cargo drag, and a short carry under time. It's the kind of stack that looks simple and empties a person just enough to show what's underneath. Ethan reached the carry gassed and lifted sloppy. Harris barked, reset, and made him pick it again with a straight back. That drew a snicker from somewhere. Ethan spun quick, looking for the source, and stole his own breath with the motion. When he turned back, Olivia was there, not close, not far, just in his lane of sight. She gave a small palm-down gesture, lower shoulders, lock breath, set cadence. He did it before his brain could argue. The carry went cleaner. He crossed on time and didn't know how to feel about the fact that the best thing he'd done all day came from listening to someone he just tried to diminish. The whistle ended the block. Water again. Shade again. A breeze finally cut across the yard and took some of the sting out of the heat. Whitaker stepped in just enough to speak to Harris and Sarah. No one heard the words. They didn't need to. Orders have a way of showing up in the shape of the next task. Olivia checked her watch, checked the sky, then raised her hand for the afternoon brief. The group drew in, shoulders close, eyes forward. The general stood at the edge of the circle, expression flat enough to hold whatever came next. Ethan stood 2 rows back, chest still heaving, pride scuffed, eyes hot the way eyes get when a person refuses to call it anger. He stared at the clean lines on Olivia's sleeves like they were a code he didn't know how to read. The yard had taken the morning to strip the polish off his act. The afternoon was lining up to test what, if anything, was under it. Olivia didn't look at him when she started speaking. She didn't look at anyone in particular. She laid out the next evolution in short, direct sentences, then closed her hand around the stopwatch. The circle loosened. Feet shifted. The course opened again. And with the general watching from the rim, the day crossed its first invisible line from routine friction into something that would demand an answer. The yard reset itself like a stage turning over between scenes. Cones shifted, ropes were retentioned, sandbags added. Harris posted the new sequence on the board: beam to wall, wall to net, net to trench, trench to carry, carry to sprint, sprint to drag. No flourishes. Just work stacked on work. Olivia walked the line once, eyes moving with that calm inventory that left nothing out. Stopwatch in her right hand, pencil behind her ear, she nodded once to Sarah. The whistle cut, and bodies moved. Ethan hit the beam with the same hunger that had cost him earlier, only now the beam answered by shaking every ounce of extra out of him. He learned by force what balance does to a person who won't listen: it steals speed a half step at a time. He saved the crossing but landed heavy and gave up free seconds. Beck crossed like he always did, almost boring in how clean it looked. Lucas made it by instinct and a lucky foot save that he turned into a grin for the nearest witness. No one had time to return it. At the wall, Ethan chose power over angle and paid again. His hands found the top late, his heel slid, and the recovery burned energy he needed for the net. Harris didn't shout. He only watched and took the measure a trainer takes when a student keeps arguing with physics. Olivia marked 2 tiny notes on her pad and moved to the net station. She didn't wait for Ethan. She demonstrated for a different lane, hands spaced, hips close, eyes up, then dropped clean and pointed to the exit line like the path had always been there. By the trench, the dirt held last night's cool a 1/4 inch under a crust of hot. The first belly to ground reminded everyone what the earth does to breath. Ethan dove messy and fought his own elbows. Dust filled his mouth, and his chest panicked before his head did. He heard his name, not spoken, only implied in the shift of eyes down the lane toward him. Pride tried to sprint, the trench made it crawl. He came out gasping and reached for the carry before his air had earned it. The first lift wobbled. Harris's palm flattened in the air: set, brace, then move. Ethan set, braced, moved. The rep went cleaner. He hated that it did. General Whitaker stood at the edge of the cones with his cap low and hands quiet. He asked nothing of the scene, and because of that the scene tried to offer more. Recruits squared shoulders they couldn't afford to square. A few tried to sell extra effort with noise. But nothing sells under a gaze that doesn't buy. The general seemed to watch time itself instead of the people trying to beat it. That made the clock feel louder. Mid-rotation, a change of wind pushed grit across the flat and took visibility down a notch. Harris didn't pause. He had them switch lanes under load and solve the course with a different rhythm. Disorder is a better teacher than comfort. Olivia moved with the group like a fixed point you navigate by. She kept the same cadence whether the sun baked or the wind stung. She adjusted a grip here, a foot there, and let the effect ripple. Small things saving big costs. That kind of economy made the difference between finishing strong and finishing loud. Ethan began to feel the edges of his act fray. His legs loaded late. His hands searched for holds that weren't where he assumed they'd be. He scanned for Olivia more than he meant to. Every time, she was already moving 2 problems ahead. It pressed on him that nothing he threw toward her made a dent. He tried a third remark anyway, the kind that treats scars like punchlines. The sound fell into the dust. Lucas's laugh never started. Beck's jaw locked. Sarah's pencil stopped moving for half a second, then went on. Olivia stepped past the comment like it was wind. She lifted a recruit's chin with 2 fingers, slid a knee under a ruck to protect a back, and never once turned toward the noise. Ethan felt smaller in a way he couldn't name. The sequence built. They added a down drag to the end of the loop, a dummy on a sled with weight enough to tell you the truth. It's the kind of station that locates your backbone and rates it with no words. Beck set his feet and moved steady, no drama, just ground covered. Lucas rushed the first pull and paid with a second longer than the first. Ethan tried to rip the sled off the line and learned how momentum punishes impatience. The strap bit his palm. He reset, lowered his shoulders, caught a breath on the bottom, and the sled finally agreed to travel. Between evolutions, Olivia gave a 3-count lesson on breath, in on the pick, hold on the move, out on the set. It wasn't soft. It was specific. It shaved seconds off people who were willing to try it. Ethan took the rhythm and hated how well it worked. He caught himself sinking to her cadence at the next carry and wanted to pretend it was his idea. Pride is loud. Improvement is quiet. The yard hears both. By early afternoon, the loop had emptied enough ego out of the group that only habits remained. That's when Harris stacked in a short rope ascent under time. The rope doesn't care about stories. It cares about grip, sequence, and core. Olivia showed the path in 6 moves that looked like 4. Beck mirrored and tapped the crossbar with a clean palm. Lucas fought the middle and turned it into a win by refusing to quit. Ethan took the rope like a challenge and made it 1, burning up the first half fast, running out of pattern at the switch. He hung there, 1 breath too long, and then slid 8 inches that felt like 80. He caught, corrected, and finished. He landed hot and looked for someone to tell him what it meant. Nobody did. Meaning lives in the next rep, not the last one. Wordless, Whitaker shifted closer. It didn't change the work. It changed the shadow. Sarah's board showed times drifting apart into 2 columns, those who saved seconds by listening and those who paid interest on every mistake. Ethan saw his name where he didn't want it. He'd never been patient enough with himself to sort that out. The yard didn't care about his backstory. It asked for his next choice. The choice arrived in the form of a gear check. On a hot day, a sloppy strap can carve a lesson into a shoulder. Olivia moved bunk to bunk along an improvised line, tightening, loosening, tapping buckles with that knuckle rap that fixes posture faster than words. When she reached Ethan, she adjusted a chest strap 1 notch, straightened a twisted shoulder strap, and tapped once on the lower frame. The pack settled into him like it belonged there. He hated the relief because of who handed it to him. Harris gathered the group for a final midday block and kept the talk to 30 seconds. He pointed to the loop like someone pointing to a sentence you already know how to read. Olivia stood off his shoulder, calm as ever. Whitaker took 3 steps forward and stopped where the shade ended. The yard went quieter without going silent. The last run before Chow rolled like a test written in plain language. Ethan came off the beam cleaner. He hit the wall with enough respect for angle to buy speed on the net. The trench fought him less when he stayed narrow. The carry clicked when he took the breath on the bottom the way Olivia had mapped. He would not call it her map. He would not call it anything. But the clock did. He beat his previous time by 6 seconds and tried not to feel the lift it gave him. Beck nodded once, no smile, just a simple acknowledgement from a man who measures wins by calm, not volume. Lucas clapped him on the back and almost knocked him forward. Ethan said nothing. They formed up in a loose half-circle for the brief. Harris scanned faces and found what he needed, the look of people who had finally met the version of themselves that shows up when showmanship runs out. He laid out the afternoon turnover to field Delta 9 for a tactical block. Sarah outlined safety and timing. Olivia closed it with 3 lines about pace, spacing, eyes up. No one had to be told the general would be there when they stepped off. They already knew. The yard had done its job. It had stripped the polish, exposed the frame, and set the stage. As they broke toward water cans and shade, Ethan stayed a half beat longer than the others, eyes on the rope, then on Olivia, then on the black SUV by the command wing. He didn't apologize to the air or to himself. He only felt the shape of what the next hours might take from him if he kept insisting on the old way. The heat bent at the edges. The flag snapped once. Harris checked his watch. Sarah capped her pen. Whitaker turned slightly to face field Delta 9. Olivia lifted the stopwatch and let it hang from 2 fingers. The day, already sharpened, drew a finer point, and everyone in that circle knew the moment had finally arrived for the truth to stop pacing the rim and step into the middle. The formation shifted toward field Delta 9, where the ground changed from hardpan to scuffed sand and the light took on a harsher edge. Smoke pots waited under tarps. Cones set lanes through plywood alleys. A Humvee shell sat half buried at the far end like a memory someone refused to dig up. Harris gave the brief with his jaw set, movement under noise, casualty extraction, short carries, no heroics, clean cadence. Sarah laid out safety the way a pilot lays out a checklist. Olivia stood to the side with the stopwatch at rest, the cord looped twice around her hand. General Whitaker stepped forward only when the wind went quiet. Authority doesn't shout when the ground already knows its name. He let a breath pass, then said enough to anchor the moment without gilding it. Recruits straightened a fraction. Ethan felt that familiar heat at the base of the neck, the place pride lives until pressure squeezes it thin. He stared at the Humvee shell and felt the outline of a story he didn't have. The block started hard. Smoke bloomed low and rolled across the lanes with that sour, training field smell. Speakers punched out recorded cracks to mimic fire. Visibility dropped to arm's length. The first team moved, and the course answered back with friction. Beck carried weight like a promise. Lucas stumbled, recovered, then learned to keep his feet small when the ground shifts. Ethan hit the alley too fast and had to check himself with a hand on the plywood. Harris's hand signals cut through the haze like road signs. Olivia's cues were smaller, palm down to slow, fingers spread to widen spacing, a tilt of her chin to move eyes up. People synced to them without thinking. Halfway through, a drag station forced everyone to get close to something that felt like it remembered pain. Dummy on sled. Weight just north of comfortable. Sand that grabs and won't return what it takes. Ethan took the strap, braced, and moved. He found the rhythm only when he stopped trying to prove anything to the rope. The sled traveled. Breath steadied. A piece of the noise in his head went dim. They rotated lanes. Heat stacked. The smoke thinned enough to smear outlines. That's when Whitaker stepped into view at the corner of the Humvee and the course shifted from test to testimony. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He said a name the yard already kept and set it down where everyone could see it. Phoenix. It didn't hover. It landed. The word moved sideways through the formation and rearranged posture. Lucas stopped halfway to a joke he would have told yesterday and let it fall. Beck's eyes narrowed a degree, not in doubt, in recognition. Ethan blinked once, as if the sound itself had changed the brightness of the afternoon. Whitaker didn't make a speech. He offered a fact. The call sign belonged to Sergeant Olivia Hale because of a night when a convoy got cut, a vehicle burned, and 3 people who weren't supposed to make it home did. He didn't paint pictures. He set out points on a line: blast, fire, weight, heat, timing, hands on steel, orders given and taken, names kept. He let the gaps between those points do the work. The Humvee shell at the end of the lane didn't look like a prop anymore. It looked like a stand-in for a thing that smelled different and sounded worse. No one moved. Even the wind waited. Olivia didn't perform and she didn't shrink. She met the general's eyes, dipped her head once, and set the stopwatch running. Work resumed, because at Fort Braddock the truth doesn't cancel the drill, it clarifies it. Ethan walked back to the line with legs that felt unfamiliar. The comments he'd tossed all morning sat like dull pieces of metal in the mouth. He wanted for a second to be anywhere else, then wanted, harder, to be exactly where he was and get it right. The next run found him quieter. He checked spacing without being told. He paced breath to movement and felt the rope yield sooner. Beck caught the shift and gave a small nod that didn't erase anything but acknowledged the turn. Harris added a timed ascent just to keep the block honest. Rope under smoke looks like a bad idea until you trust the pattern. Olivia demoed once, 6 moves that still looked like 4, and pointed to the bell. Ethan went second and fought less with what couldn't be rushed. He missed a heel hook, corrected on breath, and tapped the crossbar. No cheer. No pose. Just gravity paid and returned. Whitaker drifted closer to the circle at reset. The general looked at the scars the way a map reader looks at contour lines, not for shock but for elevation. He said the thing most people avoid saying out loud: scars are not a headline, they are coordinates. They tell you where a person has been and what terrain they cross well. He left it there, almost plain enough to miss, which made it impossible to forget. The final evolution stitched all of it together. Low light. More noise. Carry transitioning into drag, into wall, into sprint with a turn that forces you to slow down just when your body wants to flood forward. Olivia floated the same 3 anchor points she'd used since morning: pace, spacing, eyes, and the course met them halfway. Teams moved cleaner. The sleds traveled straighter. The wall stopped taxing people who finally respected angle. Ethan reached the carry and felt the old impulse to muscle it. Habit reached for noise, the moment reached for precision. He sat on the bottom the way she taught, pulled breath into the back, and walked a line that didn't waste inches. Halfway through, the strap bit his palm and told him it was time to make a choice: fight the pain or organize it. He organized it. The bell rang at the finish and didn't sound like victory. It sounded like alignment. When Harris called index, smoke drifted off like a curtain that knows its cue. The yard came back into focus as a place built by men and time, not myth. But the air kept the echo of what had been said. The circle formed without instruction. Whitaker's voice stayed level. He spoke of discipline as a promise you make to your future self and of judgment as the difference between noise and signal when nothing is easy. He didn't point at Ethan. He didn't need to. A lesson that lands will find its target without help. Olivia closed the block with a short set of notes that sounded like any other end brief. Hydrate. Fix your kit. Eat. Be back on time. In them, though, was the quiet gravity of a standard not bent by weather or opinion. She turned to go, and for the first time all day Ethan felt the rightness of staying quiet. Not the sullen kind. The kind that listens because it has finally decided there's something worth hearing. They filed toward water and chow under a sky that decided to turn kind just to prove it could. Feet dragged a little less. Hands fiddled less with straps that were already right. Lucas found his voice again and used it for something small and decent. Beck carried the same even look he'd started with but wore it like it belonged more securely now. Harris's shoulders lost a millimeter of tension. Sarah capped her pen and wrote a final time in a box she drew darker than the others. At the very edge of the yard, near the cones where the whole thing had looked like a stage that morning, Whitaker paused. He glanced once at the Humvee shell, once at Olivia, and then at the line of recruits who had learned more today than their bodies could catalog. He didn't bless the moment. He didn't need to. He just let the silence do the work. The SUVs would leave later without hurry. The smoke would be packed and the lanes reset for tomorrow. But something settled that wouldn't need resetting, a fact as ordinary and immovable as steel. Ethan felt the weight of what he'd been carrying that wasn't gear. It loosened just enough to let his lungs fill all the way. He didn't look for Olivia's eyes. He didn't hunt for a stage. He drank water, fixed a strap that didn't need fixing, and stood in the shade long enough to understand that understanding doesn't make you special. It makes you accountable. And when Harris called them back to form for the march to Chow, he stepped into line with a posture that didn't demand to be seen. It simply held. And because it held, the march to Chow felt different, less like escape, more like a reset carried in step. The clatter at the line was the same metal on tray, the same steam rising off pans, the same buzz of bodies trying to cram fuel into a narrow window. But the noise had lost that thin, performative edge. People talked to solve small problems, blisters, hot spots, sand in a buckle, then let the words go when they weren't needed. Beck ate like a metronome. Lucas picked at his food, then remembered and finished the plate because you don't steal from tomorrow when you can pay today. Harris hovered near the exit with the patience of a man who has learned that time is a tool and a trap depending on how you hold it. Sarah checked head count and hydration without turning it into a sermon. Olivia moved through the room with that same steady orbit, making gravity without acting like a planet. The turn to evening brought its own discipline. Fort Braddock breathes at dusk. The heat loosens its grip, the wind trades sand for a cleaner edge, and the yard switches from glare to shape. Field Delta 9 waited under a sky that still held color but promised darkness soon. Portable lights stood like second moons over lanes zigzagging between plywood and tires. The smoke machines slept quiet for now. The Humvee shell threw a longer shadow. Somewhere back toward the command wing, an SUV door closed. Whitaker didn't need to be seen to be present. After today, presence felt like a low current running under the ground. The brief for night evolutions was short because the day had already done the long lecture. Harris kept it to sequence, timing, accountability. Sarah added safety blocks and a reminder about spacing when depth perception lies. Olivia gave 3 points, same as always, like a drummer tapping the count before a song everyone knows: pace, spacing, eyes. The group didn't nod. They absorbed. They stepped off into blue hour. The first run at night always shows you how much your brain tries to fill gaps with fear. The beam narrows by half even though it doesn't change. The net looks higher because the sky behind it stops explaining itself. The trench steals heat out of your elbows and gives back a damp that tastes like metal. Ethan felt the old twitch in his chest, the one that used to turn into noise, and let it be a signal instead. He shortened his stride, stayed long in the spine, and remembered breath at the bottom. The beam gave him exactly what he gave it. Nothing extra. Nothing missing. The team stack put Beck ahead to set tone. He took the rope with deliberate hands and wasted nothing. Lucas went after and nearly bought himself a slide before a corrected foot set caught the pattern. He let the near miss teach without theater. Ethan hit third and found the sequence he'd fought all afternoon sitting there waiting like it had never left. He tapped the crossbar and didn't look around for the clock. The map had shifted from time to trust. Harris tightened the screws by layering in a communication drill, hand signals only, under noise. The speakers woke and threw cracks across the lanes, not loud enough to harm, just enough to lie. Olivia's cues shrank to fit the new bandwidth, palm low to drop shoulders, 2 fingers to widen a stack, a point of the chin to call a pivot. It turned the course into a conversation where the smartest voice never spoke. People started to hear themselves think in sentences that were actions: set, move, clear, cover. Ethan felt the drag station coming before he saw it. The headlamp cut a tunnel, the rest was black shapes and guessing. The strap found his palm, the weight settled, and the first pull wrote a question up his forearms. He answered it with angles, not volume. The sled agreed. Mid-drag, he caught a flash of Olivia at the lane edge, not watching him specifically, watching the whole lane the way someone watches a river for where it's about to speed up. He didn't reach for her gaze. He reached for the next correct inch. Lucas found a rhythm that belonged to the night. His feet quit arguing with the ground and started keeping secrets with it instead. Beck stayed Beck, quiet competence turned down one notch to make room for the rest of the team. Sarah's clipboard became a silhouette, but the marks got made anyway because truth doesn't care if you can see it when you write it. Harris moved like a lighthouse, here, then there, then gone, then back, always bright enough to orient and never so bright that it blinded the lesson. They rotated lanes with less friction than an hour ago, which is the only win that counts. Olivia stopped the line once to fix something small that would have grown teeth later, a carabiner twisted half a turn, a chest strap riding up into a choke, a tendency to crowd the angle of a wall. Each correction came thin as thread and strong as cable. People wore them like they'd been tailored, not thrown. Between sets, water hissed in canteens like a fuse that doesn't burn, just cools. Someone coughed grit. Someone laughed at the cough because sometimes relief borrows a joke. Ethan stood inside that tired that holds you upright instead of knocking you down and understood he had traded a layer of himself for something that weighed less and worked better. He didn't call it growth. He didn't call it anything. He just set his hands for the next thing and found they were more precise than they'd been at noon. Whitaker drifted closer near the end of the block. He said little, almost nothing, which landed as everything. The yard had already done the heavy lift. He was there to honor the physics. He looked at the team moving through a knot of tasks and saw fewer flinches, fewer wasted gestures, more time paid on the cheap by catching errors before they charged premium. His jaw eased a degree. That was as good as a handshake. Harris called an end to the main circuit and dropped a final piece on the table, a compact extraction drill linking every lane with a moving casualty. It makes or breaks cohesion because it asks people to carry more than weight. The dummy went to Beck's team first, he set the rear, Lucas took front, Ethan played inside control. Olivia fed them 3 notes and stepped back, no surprises, clear calls, settle the load before you start walking. They moved. The sled caught once, then smoothed. A corner came faster than it looked, Ethan called the turn with a palm and a tilt. They took it without jarring the patient. Small win. Big signal. The relay passed down the line. Each team paid and got change back in confidence minted under stress. Sarah wrote the numbers and wrote the names because that's how accountability respects effort. A breeze found its way in from the west and cut the smoke down to a film you could taste but not see. Lights thinned the shadows, darkness kept enough to stay honest. Olivia closed the stopwatch, not as a period, more a comma. Debrief formed itself. No one needed to be herded. Harris asked 3 questions that were really 1. What did you think would work? What actually worked? What are you going to do next time before anyone has to tell you? Answers came sparse and specific. No theater. Olivia gave back a mirror instead of a speech, the moments they were clean, the moments they were loud, the fractions of seconds saved by a breath that started 1 count earlier. She handed the praise to the pattern, not the person, which is how you keep the pattern. Ethan felt something rise in his throat and pressed it down into posture. Not shame, not exactly. The math of the day had balanced the account. Debt acknowledged, payment plan in motion. He didn't step forward. He didn't try to make a moment. He squared the strap he could reach and let the rest of the work show what he meant. Chow was long past and lights out crept closer. They marched back with that end-of-block quiet that isn't empty, it's full. Barracks 12 carried the same hum as always, boots in a line, gear hung with weary precision, water refilled, small jokes that keep people human. Beck sat on his bunk and stretched calves with a band. Lucas cleaned grit out of a buckle and set it down like it was a lesson he intended to remember. Ethan traced a bruise on his palm that would be a stripe tomorrow and felt more ownership than pain. He slipped the strap through the frame correctly on the first try. Olivia walked past the open door, glanced once, and moved on. No ceremony. No benediction. The standard was the benediction. Out by Observation Ridge, the flag curled in a wind that had finally decided to be gentle. Somewhere, an SUV engine turned, then fell quiet. Fort Braddock settled the way a place settles when it has kept its promise for the day: train what shows up, reveal what's underneath, return more than you took. The night held them all the same way, strict, fair, indifferent to excuses and wide open to effort. Ethan lay back without collapsing and let his breath find a slower gear. He replayed the alley, the rope, the drag, the carry, the turn, and each replay got a little less about his face and a little more about the line, the team, the timing. It wasn't an epiphany, it was furniture being moved into the right room. He didn't know if he'd sleep deep or float, but he knew he would wake with a plan that wasn't just a posture. Across the room, Beck's even quiet worked like a lighthouse again. Lucas's half-laugh finally sounded real. Lights clicked out in a sequence that felt like a countdown to a new start instead of an end. The yard went dark enough to reset. Field Delta 9 kept its secrets without hoarding them. And somewhere between the last boot thumping into its place and the first breath that meant sleep, the day wrote its closing sentence on every person who had carried it: tomorrow will not care what you meant, only what you do. The line hung in the dark like a quiet order that didn't need a voice. Dawn answered first, easing gray into Barracks 12, turning shapes into edges and edges into gear that needed touching again. Boots found feet. Straps found notches. Water found the bottom of canteens and came back up clean. Fort Braddock woke the way it always does, no trumpet, just the weight of expectation settling onto shoulders that had learned how to carry it. Outside, the yard looked almost innocent, raked smooth by a night wind that forgives nothing and resets everything. Field Delta 9 sat in the distance like a closed book with a ribbon still marking a page. Harris's whistle didn't sound tired. It sounded exact. Form up. The line closed with less shuffle and more certainty. Beck's face held that same even horizon as yesterday, a proof by repetition that calm isn't an accident. Lucas stood one half-step taller for reasons that had nothing to do with height. Ethan took his place without hunting for a better spot and felt a stillness he hadn't known how to keep before. Sarah clicked her pen and didn't look down yet. She waited on the air to tell her when to write. Olivia stepped out with a stopwatch that might as well have been a key. It didn't rule the moment. It unlocked it. Final evaluation reads simple until you're inside it. One consolidated loop that ties beam to wall to net to trench to carry to drag to ascent to sprint, with just enough noise to make smart brains tell small lies. Whitaker took his usual angle at the rim, hat low, hands behind his back, a small shadow that made everyone pay exact change. Harris gave the brief with nouns, not adjectives. Olivia followed with 3 quiet beats, pace, spacing, eyes, and the day said yes. They moved. The beam gave away nothing and took nothing that wasn't offered. Beck crossed first, the lead car in a convoy that knows road discipline. Lucas stepped into the rhythm and found the middle of each plank like it had always been sized for his foot. Ethan crossed without asking the beam to be impressed. He kept his hips above his heels and let gravity stop trying to negotiate. On the wall, muscle got taxed but angle paid it back with interest. Hands found top early because eyes read the holds before fingers demanded them. Olivia drifted past and didn't need to speak. Pride doesn't like that kind of silence. Discipline loves it. The trench pressed dirt into sleeves and memory into lungs. Breath narrowed to a tool with settings. In on the pick, hold on the move, out on the set, the lesson that had worked last night worked again under a different sky, which is how you know it isn't a trick. Ethan came up at the far lip and didn't chase the first clumsy step the way Oldham would have. He waited one heartbeat, set the carry clean, and walked a straight that shaved distance without cutting corners. Harris didn't praise. He didn't need to. The absence of correction lived like a stamp. Drag station gnawed at forearms and offered the same deal it offered everyone: organize, and I'll travel. Lucas nearly lost the strap on a turn and saved it with an angle, not a jerk. Beck adjusted stance and gave the sled a path instead of a fight. Ethan felt the bite rise and answered with posture. The strap settled back into his palm like a handshake that had been corrected. The sled slid. Sand kept some for itself, you can't change that, but it returned enough to keep the clock honest. Rope ascent under eyes that know what sloppy looks like is its own test of character. Olivia touched the line first, 6 moves that looked like 4, a map that refused to oversell. Beck mirrored. Lucas clung, then learned, then tapped. Ethan started quick, then remembered, then finished. He landed with legs steady and eyes level. For the first time, he didn't scan for witness. He scanned for the next prompt because the day wasn't done and he was no longer trying to turn it into an audience. They flowed into a short sprint that punished people who forgot to breathe and rewarded those who treated speed like a consequence, not a goal. Across the yard, the flag cracked once, then went quiet. The wind fell off enough to let the noise of the speakers carry, not as drama but as contour. Sarah wrote times and wrote names and didn't mark stars because stars are for skies. The work would have to be its own proof. Harris rotated the lanes and checked watches from habit more than worry. Cadence was doing more policing than he was. Mid-evolution, a small failure walked into the circle looking for a home, a crowding at the wall, a set of shoulders riding up, a panic breath hunting for a shortcut. Olivia dissolved it with a single palm-down gesture, a thumb pressed to a strap, a 2-finger shift that returned space to the lane. The fix looked too small to matter until it mattered everywhere. The next 3 stations ran smoother on the back of that inch. Ethan felt the contagion of good practice move like wind. It didn't care who started it, only that it kept going. Then came the piece that makes a training day a statement, a team extraction across a narrow corridor with a turn that lies about its own sharpness. Beck took rear again, Lucas went front, Ethan slid inside control because that's where he fit, not because he wanted to be seen. Olivia gave 3 notes, no surprises, clear calls, settle the load, and fell away fast enough to make room for ownership. They moved. The dummy lifted like a verdict, not a prop. The first steps were stiff, then less, then almost natural. At the corner, Ethan called the turn with a hand and a breath. They took it. Nothing jostled that shouldn't. The corridor accepted them and let them pass. Whitaker stepped forward a boot length and then stopped. The distance remained respectful, the gaze close. If the general said anything, it got lost in the friction of the moment and then found later when it needed to. What he did do, what everyone saw, was let the silence honor what words would have cheapened. You don't narrate a bridge as you cross it. You walk it and remember how it held. Index came with no flourish. The yard exhaled the way a shop turns off its machines, not suddenly, not showy, just exact. Harris called them into a half circle. Sarah capped her pen. Olivia clicked the stopwatch and let it hang. Debrief was not a ceremony, it was a ledger. Harris read back the numbers like addresses. Here's where you lived this morning, here's where you moved by afternoon, here's where rent is due next week. Sarah added 3 notes that sounded like corrections but felt like investments. Olivia returned the mirror, clean moments, loud ones, fractions stolen back from error by breath and angle. She didn't say Ethan's name. She didn't have to. He had met himself where the work keeps records. When Whitaker spoke, it was the kind of short that takes more weight than long ever could. He said discipline is a promise made when no one is clapping and kept when the ground is watching. He said judgment is knowing the difference between your reflection and your job. He said scars are coordinates, not credentials, they tell you what terrain a person can guide you through. He left it on the deck with everything else the day had made real. No blessing. No benediction. Just the standard, standing. Dismissal didn't feel like release. It felt like transfer of custody, from the day to the people who had to carry it out of the gate. Beck shook Harris's hand like it meant what it meant. Lucas laughed for real and then quieted for no reason other than respect for the space. Ethan turned toward Olivia and found the one sentence that didn't try to fix more than it could, "Thank you." She nodded, not to accept tribute, but to acknowledge currency. He had paid something. He would keep paying. Barracks 12 wore the soft noise of people who finally know what quiet is for. Packs came off and went back on once, the way you do when you're practicing maintenance for a life where you don't get extra tries. Boots lined up with a confidence that wasn't about the boots. Beck leaned back on his bunk with that lighthouse still burning. Lucas cleaned his buckle without theatrics. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed and felt the bruise in his palm line up with the strap he now knew how to set. He didn't call it redemption. He called it work. Outside, Observation Ridge held its view like always. The flag took more wind and then less. Somewhere near the command wing, a door closed in a way that said the day had finished what it was supposed to. Olivia crossed the yard alone, not as an exit but as an extension of everything that had happened in that circle. Phoenix was a word people would whisper again after she was gone, not because she needed it, but because the map it names kept saving time and lives from being wasted. Evening slid in with a softer edge. The heat let go. The hum of the bass folded into the kind of quiet that wears respect. Ethan stood once more in the doorway and watched the yard settle. It looked like a picture again until you remembered that tomorrow would scuff it and make it honest. He didn't rehearse speeches. He didn't plan performances. He set his kit, checked a strap, and let his breath drop into the bottom where work starts. Lights went out a row at a time. The night didn't declare anything. It didn't need to. The lesson had been written in places that don't erase easy, in calluses, in habits, in the angle of a shoulder that no longer rides high when it's time to lift. Fort Braddock kept its promise by making everyone else keep theirs. Ethan lay down under that promise and, for once, didn't argue. Tomorrow would not care what he meant, only what he did. He finally did, and for the first time since he'd stepped onto the gravel, doing felt like enough to build on.